The blood on her hands had frozen into dark crimson patches that cracked when she moved her fingers, and Katherine Fowler knew that if she stopped moving through the blinding snow, she would die before dawn. Behind her, somewhere in the white curtain of the blizzard that had descended upon the Sierra Nevada foothills, the men who had murdered her father were tracking her with the patience of wolves. She had been running for 3 days, ever since she had witnessed them shoot him down outside the mining office in Sonora, California, ever since she had made the mistake of screaming and they had seen her face. Now, in the last week of January 1882, she stumbled through drifts that reached her knees, her thin dress offering no protection against the merciless cold that bit through to her bones. Catherine's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine tree, its branches heavy with snow. Her breath came in ragged gasps that sent white plumes into the frigid air. She pressed her back against the rough bark and tried to listen for the sounds of pursuit, but the wind howled so fiercely that she could barely hear her own thoughts. Her feet had gone numb hours ago, and she wondered distantly if she still had all her toes. The thin boots she wore, suitable for walking the streets of Sonora but utterly inadequate for a mountain winter, had long since soaked through. She closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling the seductive pull of sleep. It would be so easy to simply rest here, to let the cold take her into its embrace. At least then, she would not have to face what those men would do to her if they caught her. She had heard them talking as she hid in the alley after her father fell, had heard them laughing about leaving no witnesses, about how a pretty girl like her would fetch a good price in the brothels of San Francisco if they decided to spare her life. A sound cut through the wind, sharp and distinct, a horse's whinny. Catherine's eyes snapped open, and terror flooded through her veins with enough force to momentarily banish the cold. They had found her. She tried to push herself to her feet, but her legs refused to cooperate. Her fingers scrabbled uselessly against the tree bark as she attempted to pull herself upright. The sound came again, closer now, accompanied by the muffled thud of hooves in deep snow. Katherine managed to get to her knees, then to her feet, swaying dangerously. She took one stumbling step away from the tree, then another. The world tilted sideways and she felt herself falling into the white emptiness. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. She tried to scream, tried to fight, but she had no strength left. A deep voice spoke near her ear, muffled by the wind but somehow steady and calm. "Easy now, easy, I have got you, you are safe." Safe. The word was foreign, something from another lifetime. Katherine forced her eyes open and found herself looking up into a face half obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a wool scarf pulled up against the cold. What she could see were eyes, gray as the storm clouds above them, regarding her with concern rather than cruelty. "The men," she managed to gasp out through chattering teeth. "They are coming. You have to leave me." "Nobody is leaving anybody," the man said firmly. He shifted his grip on her, and she realized he was remarkably strong, holding her weight as though she were no heavier than a child. "Can you ride?" Katherine tried to answer, but the words would not come. The edges of her vision were going dark, tunneling down to just those gray eyes watching her with such unexpected kindness. "Right then," the man said, and she felt him moving, carrying her towards something large and dark that she dimly recognized as a horse. "We are getting you out of here." She wanted to protest, to warn him again about the danger he was putting himself in by helping her, but consciousness was slipping away like water through her fingers. The last thing she remembered was the sensation of being lifted onto a saddle, of a warm body settling behind her, of an arm wrapped securely around her waist. "I promise you are safe now," the voice said again. And then there was nothing but darkness and the distant awareness of movement through the storm. Katherine woke to warmth and the crackling sound of a fire. For a long moment, she lay still, trying to understand where she was and how she had gotten there. The last clear memory she had was of the cold, the terrible bone-deep cold, and the certainty that she was about to die. She opened her eyes slowly and found herself looking at a ceiling made of rough-hewn logs. A cabin, then. She was lying on a bed, covered in heavy quilts that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. She turned her head carefully and saw the source of the fire sounds. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the single-room cabin, flames leaping cheerfully behind an iron grate. In front of the fire, sitting in a wooden chair that looked handmade, was a man. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders, and he was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching the fire with an expression of deep thought. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, and Katherine found herself once again meeting those steady gray eyes. In the firelight, she could see more of his face now. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with strong, even features made rugged by a few days' growth of dark beard. There was something in his face that spoke of both hardness and gentleness, as though he had seen difficult things but refused to let them make him cruel. "You are awake," he said, and she heard relief in his voice. "That is good. You had me worried there for a while." Katherine tried to sit up and immediately felt dizzy. The man was on his feet in an instant, crossing the small cabin in 2 long strides. "Slow down," he said gently, reaching out to steady her with a hand on her shoulder. "You have been unconscious for nearly a full day. Your body needs time to recover from the cold." A full day. Katherine's heart began to race. "The men who were following me, did they find us?" "No one has come near this cabin," the man assured her. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again, maintaining a respectful distance. "The storm was fierce. It would have covered our tracks completely. Whatever was chasing you, they will not find you here." Some of the tension left Katherine's shoulders, but fear still gnawed at her insides. She looked down at herself and realized she was wearing a man's shirt, far too large for her frame, and her dress was nowhere to be seen. She must have made some sound of alarm because the man quickly raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Your dress was soaked through," he explained, a slight flush creeping into his cheeks. "I had to get you out of it or you would have died of the cold. I kept my eyes averted, I swear it. Your dress is drying by the fire." Katherine looked past him and saw her dress hanging on a line strung near the fireplace. She felt heat rise to her own face, embarrassment warring with gratitude. This stranger had saved her life, had brought her to shelter, and tended to her with obvious care. The least she could do was trust that his intentions had been honorable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life. I do not even know your name." "Raphael Vance," he said, and offered her a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Most people call me Rafe." "And you are Katherine Fowler." "Kate." She hesitated, then asked, "Where are we?" "My cabin, about 8 miles northeast of Sonora. I work a small mining claim up here, though the winter has made work impossible for now." He gestured around the spare but tidy space. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry." Sonora. Katherine's chest tightened at the mention of the town. Her father was dead there, lying in some undertaker's back room if anyone had bothered to collect his body from the street. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. "Hey now," Rafe said softly, concern evident in his voice. "You are safe here, I promise you that. Whatever happened, whatever you are running from, you do not have to face it alone." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her, and suddenly Katherine was crying in earnest, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. She heard Rafe move, and then he was sitting on the edge of the bed, one large hand resting carefully on her shoulder. "It is all right," he murmured. "Let it out. You have been holding on to fear for too long." When the storm of tears finally subsided, Katherine felt emptied but somehow lighter. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of the borrowed shirt and found the courage to look at Rafe again. He was watching her with patience and sympathy, making no move to rush her. "They killed my father," she heard herself say. "3 days ago in front of the mining office in Sonora. I saw it happen." Rafe's expression darkened. "Did you know the men who did it? One of them, Conrad Hayes. He is a claim jumper and a murderer, though he has never been convicted. My father testified against him 2 months ago in a dispute over water rights. The judge ruled in my father's favor, and Hayes swore he would make him pay." Katherine's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "He kept his promise. He shot my father down in broad daylight, and his 2 companions stood there laughing while my father died." "And you witnessed this?" Rafe said grimly. Katherine nodded. "I was supposed to meet my father at the office. I was late, thank God, or I would have been standing right next to him. I was crossing the street when I heard the shots. I saw my father fall, saw Hayes standing over him with the gun. I screamed before I could stop myself, and they all looked at me. I ran, and they chased me. I have been running ever since. Why not go to the sheriff?" "Sheriff Tucker is in Hayes's pocket. Everyone knows it, but no one can prove it. If I had gone to the sheriff, I would have been dead before nightfall." Katherine met Rafe's eyes. "Hayes and his men tracked me out of town and into the foothills. I thought the storm would kill me, but at least then they would not have gotten to me first." Rafe was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought. Finally, he said, "You cannot go back to Sonora, not yet anyway, not until we figure out how to deal with Hayes." "We?" Katherine repeated, startled. "You do not think I am going to just send you back down that mountain alone, do you?" Rafe shook his head. "No, Kate. I told you that you were safe, and I meant it. You can stay here as long as you need to. When you are strong enough, we will figure out what to do about Conrad Hayes." "You do not even know me," Katherine protested. "Why would you put yourself at risk for a stranger?" Rafe stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape beyond. "5 years ago, I was prospecting in Nevada. I had a partner, a good man named Samuel, who had a wife and 2 young daughters back in St. Louis. We struck a decent vein of silver, nothing that would make us rich but enough to live well on. A gang of claim jumpers attacked our camp one night. They killed Samuel and left me for dead with a bullet in my shoulder. By the time I recovered enough to ride for help, they had cleaned out the claim and disappeared." He turned back to face her, and Katherine saw old pain in his eyes. "Samuel's wife never got the money he had promised to send her. His daughters grew up without a father because I was not strong enough or fast enough to protect him. I swore that day that I would never stand by again when someone needed help. So no, Kate, I do not know you. But that does not matter. You needed help, and I was there to give it. That is reason enough." Katherine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. This man, this stranger who had pulled her from the snow and promised her safety, was offering her more than just shelter. He was offering her hope. "Thank you, Rafe," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for this." "You do not need to repay me," Rafe said simply. He moved back to the fire and ladled something from a pot hanging over the flames into a wooden bowl. "Right now, you need to eat something and get your strength back. We can worry about the rest later." He brought her the bowl, and Katherine discovered it contained a simple but hearty stew of venison, potatoes, and carrots. Her stomach cramped with sudden hunger, and she realized she had not eaten in days. She took the bowl gratefully and began to eat, trying not to wolf down the food despite her ravenous appetite. Rafe settled back into his chair, giving her space but remaining close enough to help if she needed it. Katherine studied him between bites, taking in details she had been too frightened or too exhausted to notice before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean, muscular build of a man who made his living through hard physical labor. His clothes were simple but well-maintained. The shirt and trousers of a working man kept clean by someone who took pride in his appearance, despite the isolation of his circumstances. His hands, she noticed, were large and calloused but moved with surprising gentleness as he poured coffee from a pot on the fire. "Have you lived up here long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "About 2 years," Rafe replied. "After what happened in Nevada, I drifted for a while. I worked cattle drives, did some ranch work, even spent a few months as a deputy in a little town in Arizona. Eventually, I ended up in California and decided to try my hand at mining again. The claim I am working is not rich, but it produces enough gold to keep me fed and clothed. And I like the solitude up here. It gives a man time to think." "You not get lonely?" Rafe considered the question. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than bad company. I go into Sonora once a month or so for supplies and to sell whatever gold I have found. That is enough civilization for me." Katherine finished the stew and set the bowl aside. Already, she could feel warmth and strength seeping back into her body. "What were you doing out in the storm yesterday, if you had not been there?" "I was checking my trap line," Rafe explained. "I set snares for rabbits and other small game to supplement my food stores through the winter. The storm came up faster than I expected, and I was heading back to the cabin when I heard your horse whinny. Or rather, I heard my horse answer." He smiled slightly. "Seems that even in a blizzard, horses like to talk to each other. I figured that any horse out in weather like that probably meant someone was in trouble, so I went to investigate. And found me about to freeze to death under a tree." "And found you," Rafe confirmed. "Probably the luckiest moment of both our lives when you think about it. Another hour and you would have been lost." Katherine shuddered, remembering the pull of the cold, the desire to simply close her eyes and sleep. "I thought I was going to die. I had made my peace with it." "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for," Rafe said. "Most people would have given up long before you did. You kept moving, kept fighting to survive. That takes courage." The words warmed Katherine more than the fire or the stew. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such respect, such genuine admiration. Her father had loved her, but he had also been a product of his time, prone to treating her like a fragile ornament rather than a capable adult. This man, this cowboy turned miner who barely knew her name, was looking at her like she was strong, like she was worth saving. Over the next few days, Katherine recovered her strength under Rafe's careful attention. He proved to be a surprisingly good caretaker, knowing when to push her to eat more and when to let her rest. The cabin was small, forcing them into close proximity, but Rafe was unfailingly respectful, always maintaining a proper distance and giving her as much privacy as the single room would allow. He slept on the floor by the fire, insisting that she keep the bed, and rose early each morning to rebuild the fire and prepare a simple breakfast. The storm continued to rage outside, piling snow against the cabin walls and howling through the trees. Katherine was grateful for the enforced isolation, knowing that the same weather that trapped them in the cabin also made it impossible for Hayes and his men to continue their search. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something like safety. As her body healed, Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to Rafe. She watched him as he moved about the cabin, fascinated by the quiet confidence with which he performed even mundane tasks. He carved wooden utensils while sitting by the fire, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small knife. He mended a torn shirt with neat, even stitches that would have done credit to any seamstress. He told her stories of his travels, painting vivid pictures of cattle drives across endless plains and nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. In turn, Katherine found herself talking about her own life. She told him about growing up in Sonora, the daughter of a modestly successful miner who had managed to find just enough gold to provide a comfortable life for his family. She spoke of her mother, who had died of cholera when Katherine was 12, leaving her to keep house for her father and learn to navigate a rough mining town with only her wits and determination to protect her. She described her father, his kindness and his stubbornness, his dreams of striking it rich and his contentment with what he had. "He was a good man," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind howling outside like a living thing. "He deserved better than to die in the street like a dog." "Yes, he did," Rafe agreed quietly. "And Conrad Hayes deserves to answer for what he did." "How?" Katherine asked bitterly. "You said yourself that the sheriff is corrupt. There is no law in Sonora that will touch Hayes." "Then we go around the law," Rafe said. He had been whittling a piece of wood, but now he set it aside and looked at her directly. "There is a federal marshal in Sacramento, a man named James Holbrook. I met him a few years back when I was doing deputy work. He is honest, and he has jurisdiction over the whole territory. If we can get word to him, he can come to Sonora and arrest Hayes properly." Hope stirred in Katherine's chest, but caution tempered it. "How would we get word to him? It is a long way to Sacramento, and Hayes will be watching the roads." "We will figure it out," Rafe assured her. "Once the storm breaks and you are strong enough to travel, we will make a plan. For now, just focus on getting well." Katherine nodded, but her mind was already racing. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt like there might be a path forward, a way to see justice done without sacrificing her own life in the process. And it was all because of the man sitting across from her, this quiet cowboy who had promised her safety and seemed determined to keep that promise no matter the cost. That night, lying in the darkness with the fire burned down to embers, Katherine found herself thinking about Rafe in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or safety. She thought about the strength in his arms when he had carried her through the storm, about the gentleness in his voice when he had comforted her tears, about the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. She had known him for only a few days, but already she could not imagine facing the future without him. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The storm finally broke on the 5th day, leaving the world outside the cabin buried under 3 feet of pristine white snow. The sun emerged for the first time in nearly a week, turning the landscape into a glittering wonderland that hurt to look at. Katherine stood in the doorway of the cabin, breathing in the cold, clean air and marveling at the beauty of it all. "We will need to dig out a path to the woodpile," Rafe said from behind her. "And I should check on the horses to make sure they weathered the storm all right." "Horses?" Katherine turned to look at him. "You have more than one, 3 actually. My own mount, your horse that I led back here along with you, and a pack mule I use for hauling supplies. There is a small shelter about 50 yards behind the cabin where I keep them. It is crude, but it keeps them out of the worst of the weather." "I did not even know I still had my horse," Katherine admitted. "I thought for sure he had run off when I collapsed." "Horses are smart," Rafe said with a slight smile. "He was standing right there next to you when I found you, like he was trying to keep you warm. He is a good animal. You are lucky to have him." They spent the morning digging paths through the snow, hard work that left Katherine breathless but also exhilarated. After so many days confined to the cabin, it felt good to move, to work, to feel her muscles strain with effort. Rafe worked beside her, occasionally glancing over to make sure she was not overdoing it, but generally letting her set her own pace. When they finally reached the shelter, Katherine was delighted to find all three animals healthy and calm. Her horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, nickered with pleasure when he saw her and pushed his nose into her hands, searching for treats she did not have. "He missed you," Rafe observed, stroking the neck of his own horse, a tall black mare with intelligent eyes. "Animals know when their people care about them." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at the simple statement. Copper had been a gift from her father on her 20th birthday, 2 years ago. He had been her constant companion ever since, carrying her through the streets of Sonora and on occasional rides into the surrounding hills. That he had stayed with her even in the storm, even when she could no longer guide or care for him, spoke to a loyalty that touched her heart. "Thank you for saving him too," she said to Rafe. "I know it must have been harder to get both of us back here in the storm." Rafe shrugged. "I could not leave him to freeze any more than I could leave you. Besides, he made the trip easier, not harder. Having him walk beside my own horse kept them both calm in the wind." They fed the animals and made sure they had water, then trudged back to the cabin through the path they had carved in the snow. The physical work had warmed Katherine from the inside out, and she felt more alive than she had in days. Back inside, Rafe built up the fire while Katherine prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, working with the limited supplies available in the cabin. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying Rafe's face in the firelight. He had shaved that morning, she noticed, revealing the strong line of his jaw and making him look younger, less hardened. There was something about him that called to her, something beyond gratitude or simple attraction. He made her feel safe, yes, but more than that, he made her feel seen. He listened when she talked, really listened, as though her words mattered. He treated her like an equal, never condescending or dismissive. In all her 22 years, she could not remember any man looking at her the way Rafe did, like she was both strong and precious at the same time. "What are you thinking about?" Rafe asked, and Katherine realized she had been staring. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but decided to answer honestly. "I was thinking about how kind you have been to me, how different you are from most men I have known." Rafe looked surprised, almost uncomfortable with the compliment. "I have not done anything special, just what any decent person would do." "No," Katherine said firmly. "Most people would have left me in the snow, or they would have helped me but expected something in return. You have asked for nothing, have made me feel safe and respected even in circumstances that could have been compromising. That is not common decency, Rafe. That is genuine goodness." He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes holding hers across the small table. Finally, he said softly, "You make it easy to be good, Kate. From the moment I found you, even half frozen and terrified, there was something about you that drew me. Your strength, your courage, the way you kept fighting even when you thought you were going to die. I could not have left you any more than I could stop breathing. And these past days, getting to know you, hearing your stories, seeing your smile when you started to feel better." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I do not expect anything from you. But I want you to know that having you here, it has been the best thing to happen to me in longer than I can remember." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Rafe must be able to hear it. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. She stood up slowly, moving around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. Rafe rose to meet her, and suddenly they were close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Rafe," she whispered, hardly knowing what she was asking for. He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his large, calloused hand. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me this is not what you want and I will step back right now. But Kate, I need you to know that I care about you. More than I should after just a few days, more than makes any sense. But I do." "I care about you too," Katherine breathed, and then she was rising on her toes and his head was bending down and their lips were meeting in a kiss that sent fire racing through her veins. It started gentle, almost tentative, as though they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Catherine's arms were around Rafe's neck, and his hands were on her waist, pulling her closer. And the kiss deepened into something that felt like inevitability, like the whole world had been leading them to this exact moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rafe rested his forehead against hers. "Kate," he said, and her name was a prayer on his lips. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, treat you with the respect you deserve." "You already are," Katherine assured him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "You already have been from the moment you found me. Rafe, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. When I am with you, I feel safe and strong and like I can face whatever comes. Please do not push me away because you think you are doing the right thing." "I am not pushing you away," Rafe said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I am just making sure you know that my intentions are honorable. I do not just want a few stolen moments with you, Kate. I want a future. I want to help you get justice for your father, and then I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too. All of it." Rafe kissed her again, and this time there was promise in it, a commitment to the future they had just spoken of. When they finally settled back by the fire, Katherine curled against Rafe's side with his arm around her shoulders. She felt like the world had shifted on its axis. A week ago, she had been running for her life, certain she would die alone in the cold. Now she was here, warm and safe, and falling in love with a man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "We should talk about what happens next," Rafe said after a while, his fingers absently stroking her hair. "The storm has passed, which means Hayes and his men will start looking for you again once the snow melts enough for travel." The mention of Hayes was like a splash of cold water, pulling Katherine back to the harsh reality of their situation. "How long do you think we have?" "A week, maybe 2 if we are lucky. The snow is deep, but it will start to melt quickly once the sun stays out. And Hayes knows you headed up into the foothills. He will check every cabin and mine shaft within a day's ride of Sonora. Then we need to get word to the federal marshal in Sacramento," Katherine said, straightening up. "Is there a way to do it without me going myself?" Rafe nodded slowly. "There is a town called Columbia about 10 miles north of here. It is bigger than Sonora, with a telegraph office. I could ride there and send a wire to Marshal Holbrook, explain the situation and ask him to come investigate. It would mean leaving you here alone for a day, maybe 2. "I do not like the idea of you putting yourself at risk for me," Katherine protested. "And I do not like the idea of Hayes getting away with murder," Rafe countered. "Kate, this is the best option we have. Marshal Holbrook can bring federal authority to bear on the situation. He can arrest Hayes and his men, and he can do it in a way that even a corrupt local sheriff cannot interfere with. But we need to act fast, before Hayes finds you or before he decides to leave the territory entirely." Katherine knew he was right, but fear still gnawed at her. The thought of Rafe riding into danger, of something happening to him because he had chosen to help her, was almost unbearable. But she also knew that hiding in the cabin forever was not a solution. Eventually, they would run out of supplies, or Hayes would find them, or something else would go wrong. They needed help, and the federal marshal was their best chance of getting it. "All right," she said finally. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning, as soon as there is light enough to travel safely. The snow will slow me down, but midnight is sure-footed. We will make it there and back without trouble. Promise me you will be careful," Katherine said, gripping his hand tightly. "Promise me you will come back." Rafe raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I promise. Nothing could keep me from coming back to you, Kate. Nothing in this world." They spent the rest of the evening making plans and preparing for Rafe's journey. He would take supplies for 2 days and his rifle, just in case. Katherine would stay in the cabin with the doors barred, not opening them for anyone until she heard Rafe's specific knock, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slow ones. She did not like the plan, hated the thought of being separated from him even for a short time, but she understood the necessity of it. That night, they lay together by the fire, fully clothed but wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly until the early hours of the morning. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their fears and hopes. Katherine learned that Rafe had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and that he had left home at 16 to seek his fortune in the West. Rafe learned that Katherine had always dreamed of having a home filled with love and laughter, with children running through the rooms and a husband who valued her for more than just her ability to keep house. "I want that with you," Rafe murmured as the fire burned low and sleep began to claim them. "A home, a family, a life built together. I know it is too soon to be saying such things, but I cannot help how I feel. You are everything I never knew I was looking for, Kate." "I want it too," Katherine whispered back, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Whatever it takes, whatever we have to face, I want to face it with you." As dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, Rafe prepared to leave. He saddled Midnight and loaded his supplies, checking and rechecking everything to make sure he had not forgotten anything. Katherine stood in the doorway of the cabin, hugging herself against the cold morning air and fighting back tears. She would not send him off with crying. He needed to focus on the journey ahead, not worry about her. Rafe led Midnight over to the cabin and pulled Katherine into a fierce embrace. "I will be back before you know it," he promised. 2 days at most. "You stay inside, keep the fire going, and do not open that door for anyone but me." "I know," Katherine said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I will be fine. You just focus on getting to Columbia safely and sending that wire." Rafe pulled back and kissed her deeply, a kiss full of promise and longing. "When I get back, when this is all over and Hayes is behind bars, I am going to ask you properly to be my wife. I want you to know that now, so you have time to think about your answer." Katherine laughed through her tears. "I do not need time to think about it. The answer is yes, has been yes since the moment you kissed me. Now go, before I lose my nerve and beg you to stay." With one last lingering look, Rafe swung up into the saddle and turned Midnight toward the north. Katherine watched until horse and rider disappeared into the trees, then went back inside the cabin and barred the door behind her. The space felt impossibly empty without Rafe's presence, and she had to fight the urge to run after him. Instead, she busied herself with tasks around the cabin. She mended a tear in her dress, now dry and relatively clean. She reorganized the limited food supplies, taking inventory of what they had. She kept the fire built up high, as much for comfort as for warmth, and she waited. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Katherine tried to read from the single book in the cabin, a battered copy of Shakespeare's plays, but found she could not concentrate. Her mind kept wandering to Rafe, imagining him making his way through the snow-covered landscape, hoping he was safe, praying that nothing would go wrong. Night fell and still Katherine waited. She knew Rafe would not make it back until at least tomorrow, probably tomorrow evening if the snow continued to slow his progress. But the cabin felt wrong without him, too quiet, too empty. She found herself jumping at every sound, every creak of the settling logs, every gust of wind against the walls. She was just adding another log to the fire when she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of horses, multiple horses, moving through the snow toward the cabin. Katherine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. It could not be Rafe. He had taken only one horse and he would not be back this soon, which meant that someone else had found the cabin. Moving as quietly as she could, Katherine doused the lantern and moved away from the fireplace, where the light would silhouette her. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fire, the only weapon she could find, and positioned herself behind the door. Outside, the sounds grew louder. Men's voices, rough and cruel, and the words they were saying made her want to vomit. "Check every cabin in these hills," Hayes said. "She has to be holed up somewhere, probably half dead from the cold. Easy pickings when we find her. And after we take her back to Hayes, what then?" "Then Hayes does whatever he wants with her. Our job is just to find her and bring her in." "Alive," he said, but he did not say she had to be unmarked. Laughter, ugly and threatening. Katherine pressed herself against the wall, gripping the poker so tightly her knuckles went white. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. Even if she could somehow fight them off, which seemed impossible, the noise would just draw more attention. And Rafe was not here to help her. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Open up. We know someone is in there. We can see the smoke from your chimney." Katherine held her breath, praying they would think the cabin was abandoned, that someone had simply left a fire burning when they left. But even as she thought it, she knew how foolish that hope was. "Fine, we will do this the hard way." The sound of something heavy ramming against the door, once, twice. The bar across the door groaned but held. "Check the window, see if you can get a look inside." Katherine's mind raced. The cabin had only one window on the wall opposite the door. If they looked through it, they would see her. And even if they did not, they would eventually break down the door. She needed another option, needed some way to escape or defend herself that did not end with her captured or dead. Her eyes fell on the trapdoor in the floor, barely visible in the dim light from the fire. Rafe had mentioned it casually. A small root cellar dug beneath the cabin to keep food cool in the summer and prevent it from freezing in the winter. It was not much, but it was the only hiding place available. Moving as silently as she could, Katherine pulled up the trapdoor and dropped down into the narrow space below. It was perhaps 5 feet deep and 6 feet square, with rough earthen walls and a ceiling made of the cabin's floorboards. Baskets of potatoes and turnips lined one wall, along with a few jars of preserved vegetables. She pulled the trapdoor closed above her just as she heard glass breaking. "There is no one here," a voice called out, muffled by the floorboards above Katherine's head. "Just a fire in the hearth and some supplies. Must be someone's winter camp." "Then where is whoever owns it?" Another voice, deeper and more suspicious. "You do not just leave a fire burning and walk away. Maybe they went to check trap lines or something." "Look, there are tracks outside leading to a shelter out back. Probably went to tend their animals." The sound of boots walking across the floor above her. Katherine held her breath, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might give her away. She could see thin cracks of light between the floorboards, shadows moving as the men searched the cabin. Nothing here worth taking except some food. You want to wait for whoever lives here to come back. Hayes did not pay us to sit around in some prospector's cabin. We check it, mark it off the list, and move on to the next one. There are a dozen more shelters within a few miles of here. What about the woman? If she is hiding in one of these cabins, we are bound to find her eventually. Then we keep looking until we do. Come on, let's go. We can hit 2 more places before dark. Katherine listened to the men ransack the cabin, taking food and supplies that Rafe would need. She heard them poke the fire, presumably to warm themselves before heading back out into the cold. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard the door open and close, followed by the blessed sound of horses moving away through the snow. She stayed in the root cellar for another hour, too terrified to move, before finally gathering the courage to push open the trapdoor and climb back into the cabin. The space was a mess. The men had taken most of the food, scattered the rest across the floor, and kicked over the chair Rafe had been sitting in just that morning. But they had not found her, and that was what mattered. Katherine quickly barred the door again and began to clean up the mess, her hands shaking with residual fear and adrenaline. She knew she had been incredibly lucky. If the men had been more thorough in their search, if they had noticed the trapdoor or decided to wait for the cabin's owner to return, she would have been caught. And then everything Rafe was doing to help her would have been for nothing. As darkness fell outside, Katherine huddled by the fire and thought about what had just happened. Hayes was searching the hills systematically, checking every possible hiding place. It was only a matter of time before he covered enough ground to find the cabin again, and next time she might not be so lucky. They needed the federal marshal, needed him desperately, and they needed him soon. When Rafe finally returned late the following evening, Katherine nearly sobbed with relief. She had spent the entire day in a state of high tension, jumping at every sound, convinced that Hayes's men would return at any moment. The sound of Rafe's knock, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slow ones, was the sweetest thing she had ever heard. She threw open the door and launched herself into his arms before he had even fully stepped inside. Rafe caught her easily, holding her tight as she buried her face in his chest and tried not to cry. Hey, what is wrong?" he asked, alarm clear in his voice. "Did something happen?" Katherine nodded against his chest, then pulled back enough to look up at him. "Hayes's men were here yesterday, looking for me. 3 of them, maybe more. They searched the cabin, but I hid in the root cellar and they did not find me. They took most of our food and then left." Rafe's face darkened with anger and something that looked like fear. He pulled Katherine back inside and barred the door, then led her to sit by the fire. "Tell me everything that happened, from the beginning." Katherine related the entire terrifying encounter, watching as Rafe's expression grew grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. "I should have been here," he said finally, his voice rough with self-recrimination. "I should have protected you." "You were trying to get help," Katherine reminded him gently, "and I am fine. They did not find me." "Did you manage to send the wire to the marshal?" Rafe nodded. "I did. Marshal Holbrook wired back within an hour. He is leaving Sacramento immediately and should arrive in Sonora within 3 days. He is bringing 2 deputies with him, and he promised to investigate the allegations against Hayes thoroughly. 3 days. Katherine felt a mix of relief and continued anxiety. 3 days was not long, but it was not immediate either. And in 3 days, Hayes's men could search a lot of cabins. "We cannot stay here," Rafe said, echoing her thoughts. "Hayes is searching systematically and he will be back. We need to move, find somewhere else to lay low until the marshal arrives." "Where?" Katherine asked. "If they are checking every cabin and shelter in the hills, Where can we go that they would not think to look?" Rafe was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face cleared. "There is an abandoned mine shaft about 6 miles from here, up in the higher elevations. It was played out years ago, and most people have forgotten it even exists. The entrance is partially collapsed, which makes it look completely impassable. But there is actually a way through, if you know where to look. I discovered it when I was exploring the area after I first arrived." A mine shaft. Katherine could not keep the doubt out of her voice. It sounded dark and dangerous, nothing like the relative comfort of the cabin. "I know it is not ideal," Rafe admitted, "but it is dry and there is enough space inside for us and the horses. More importantly, no one looking for you would think to check a collapsed mine. We will only need to stay there for a few days, just until Marshal Holbrook arrives and arrests Hayes. Then we can come back here or go into Sonora or do whatever you want." Katherine considered their options. Staying in the cabin was clearly not safe, not now that Hayes's men knew of its existence. And while the idea of hiding in an abandoned mine did not appeal to her, she trusted Rafe's judgment. If he said it was their best option, she believed him. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow," Rafe said. "We will pack up everything we need, load the horses, and make the trip in one go. The snow will slow us down, but 6 miles is manageable if we start early enough." They spent the rest of the evening preparing for the journey. Rafe showed Katherine how to roll blankets and supplies into tight packs that could be secured to the saddle. He checked his rifle and the small pistol he carried, making sure both were clean and loaded. Katherine mended a weak spot in Copper's bridle and helped Rafe sort through the remaining food supplies to determine what they could carry. As they worked, Katherine found herself watching Rafe with new eyes. He moved with such purpose, such capability, planning and preparing for every contingency. She had always known he was competent, but seeing him like this, focused and determined to keep her safe, made her heart swell with love and admiration. "What are you staring at?" Rafe asked, catching her gaze and giving her a small smile. "You," Katherine said honestly. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am that you found me in the storm. How lucky I am that you are willing to do all of this to keep me safe." Rafe crossed the small space between them and pulled her into his arms. "I am the lucky one," he murmured against her hair. "You came into my life like a force of nature, Kate. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to want to build a future with someone. I would do anything to protect you, to make sure you are safe and happy. Anything at all." Katherine tilted her head back and kissed him, pouring all of her feelings into the touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she whispered, "When this is over, when Hayes is behind bars and we do not have to hide anymore, I want to marry you as soon as possible. I do not want to waste any more time." "Neither do I," Rafe agreed fervently. "The moment Marshal Holbrook takes Hayes into custody, we are going to find a preacher and make this official. I want you to be my wife, Kate. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you." "Yes," Katherine breathed, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "Yes to all of it. I love you, Rafe. I know it has only been a little more than a week, but I love you with everything I have." "I love you too," Rafe said, and kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. They left the cabin at dawn, the sky just beginning to lighten from black to deep purple. Rafe led the way on midnight, with Katherine following on Copper and the pack mule trailing behind, loaded with supplies. The journey was difficult, the horses struggling through snow that sometimes reached their chests. But Rafe navigated the terrain with confidence, following a route that seemed to exist only in his memory. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became more rugged and wild. Towering pines gave way to sparse, wind-twisted trees clinging to rocky slopes. The air grew thinner and colder, and Katherine found herself grateful for the heavy coat Rafe had insisted she wear. After several hours of hard travel, Rafe finally stopped in front of what looked like a sheer rock face. Katherine could see the dark mouth of a mine shaft, but just as Rafe had said, the entrance was choked with fallen timber and rocks, appearing completely impassable. "This is it?" she asked doubtfully. "This is it," Rafe confirmed. He dismounted and led Midnight around the side of the rockfall, where Katherine could now see a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. The main entrance collapsed years ago, but this side opening is still intact. It is hidden from casual observation, which is exactly what we need. Rafe went through first, leading Midnight carefully through the gap. Katherine followed with Copper, her heart in her throat as rocks scraped against her legs, and the narrow passage seemed to close in around them. But then they were through, emerging into a large, open cavern dimly lit by sunlight filtering through cracks in the rock above. Katherine looked around in surprise. The space was much larger than she had expected, easily 40 feet across and 20 feet high at the center. The floor was relatively smooth, covered in a layer of dirt and small rocks. Old mining equipment lay scattered about, rusted and forgotten, but the air was dry and smelled only faintly of must. "This is where the miners hit a vein of gold that played out almost immediately," Rafe explained as he began unpacking the mule. "They dug this chamber and several smaller tunnels leading off it, but they never found anything worth the effort. Eventually, they abandoned the claim and moved on. That was probably 20 years ago or more." "It is better than I expected," Katherine admitted, dismounting from Copper and beginning to help with the unpacking. "Dark, but at least it is dry and protected from the wind." They spent the next few hours making the mine shaft as comfortable as possible. Rafe set up a small fire pit near the entrance, where the smoke could escape through the gaps in the rock. Katherine spread out their blankets in a corner that was relatively flat and free of debris, creating a makeshift bed. They saw to the horses, making sure they had food and water and were securely tied in a section of the cavern away from the fire. As darkness fell outside and the temperature dropped, Katherine found herself grateful for the mine's protection. The stone walls seemed to hold the warmth from their small fire, making the space surprisingly cozy. She sat close to Rafe, leaning against his solid warmth, and watched the flames dance. "3 more days," she said quietly. "Just 3 more days and Marshal Holbrook will be in Sonora. Then this will all be over." 3 days, Rafe agreed. "We can manage 3 days. And then, Kate, we are going to start our life together properly. No more hiding, no more fear. Just you and me and whatever future we decide to build." Katherine turned to look at him, seeing her own hopes and dreams reflected in his gray eyes. "Tell me about the future you see for us." "I want to hear it." Rafe smiled and pulled her closer. "I see us leaving these mountains and heading somewhere new, somewhere we can start fresh without the shadow of what happened here. Maybe we will go south, down to the San Joaquin Valley where the land is flat and fertile. I will work a ranch or farm, something that lets us build a real home. We will have a house with real walls and a good roof, not a cabin but a home. And we will fill it with children, as many as you want. I see Sunday dinners with the whole family gathered around the table, and I see you laughing while our kids chase each other through the yard. I see growing old with you, Kate, and being grateful every single day that I was in the right place at the right time to find you in that storm." Katherine was crying openly now, but these were happy tears. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. "That sounds like everything I have ever wanted. A home, a family, a life built on love instead of fear or loneliness." Then that is what we will have, Rafe promised. I swear it to you, Kate. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are happy and safe and loved. They kissed then, long and deep, a kiss that tasted of promises and hope. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, they held each other close and talked about their future, painting pictures with words of the life they would build together once the threat of Conrad Hayes was finally behind them. The next 2 days passed slowly but peacefully. They stayed in the mine, venturing out only briefly to check the horses and gather more firewood. Rafe proved to be good company, entertaining Katherine with more stories from his travels and teaching her card games he had learned during his time as a cowboy. They talked endlessly, learning more about each other, sharing their thoughts and fears and dreams. On the 3rd day, the day Marshal Holbrook was supposed to arrive in Sonora, Rafe rode down from the mine to see what was happening in town. Katherine wanted to go with him, but they both agreed it was too risky. Instead, she stayed behind with the horses and the pistol Rafe insisted she keep, promising to be careful and to come back as soon as he had news. The hours Katherine spent alone in the mine were some of the longest of her life. She tried to stay busy, checking on the horses and organizing their supplies, but her mind would not settle. What if something went wrong? What if Hayes saw Rafe and realized he was helping her? What if the marshal had not arrived after all? As the sun began to set and shadows lengthened across the mine floor, Katherine finally heard the sound she had been waiting for. Hoofbeats, coming from the direction of the hidden entrance. She grabbed the pistol and positioned herself where she could see the gap in the rocks, her heart pounding. Rafe appeared, leading Midnight through the narrow opening, and the relief that flooded through Katherine nearly made her knees buckle. She set down the pistol and ran to him, and Rafe caught her in a fierce embrace. "It is done," he said, his voice jubilant. Marshal Holbrook arrived yesterday evening with his deputies. This morning, they arrested Conrad Hayes and his 2 accomplices on federal charges of murder and conspiracy. Hayes tried to resist, but the marshal had him in irons before he could draw his gun. They are being transported to Sacramento for trial. Katherine could hardly believe what she was hearing. "It is really over. Hayes is really in custody." "It is really over," Rafe confirmed, pulling back to look at her face. "The marshal wants to speak with you to get your testimony about what you witnessed, but he said you are in no danger now. Hayes and his men are locked up tight, and Sheriff Tucker is under investigation for corruption. You are safe, Kate. You can come out of hiding." The emotions that had been building in Katherine for days, for weeks, suddenly broke free. She burst into tears, sobbing against Rafe's chest as he held her and murmured soothing words. It was over. The nightmare that had begun with her father's murder was finally over. She was safe. She was free. And she was in the arms of the man she loved. "I want to go into Sonora tomorrow," she said when she could finally speak again. "I want to give my testimony to the marshal, and then I want to find a preacher. I want to marry you, Rafe. I do not want to wait another day." Rafe's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then that is exactly what we will do. Tomorrow we go into town, you give your testimony, and then we get married. And after that, we start planning our future, wherever that may take us." They spent that night in the mine, but it no longer felt like a hiding place. Instead, it felt like the threshold between their old lives and the new one they were about to begin. They lay together in the firelight, talking and laughing and planning, both of them filled with a joy and anticipation that made sleep impossible. The next morning, they rode down from the mountains together. As they descended, leaving the snow-covered heights behind and entering the green foothills, Katherine felt as though she was emerging from a long, dark tunnel into bright daylight. The world looked different somehow, more vivid and full of possibility. Sonora was bustling when they arrived, alive with the news of Conrad Hayes's arrest. People stopped them on the street to congratulate Katherine on her survival and to shake Rafe's hand, thanking him for his role in bringing a murderer to justice. Katherine found it surreal, this sudden transformation from hunted fugitive to celebrated survivor. Marshal Holbrook met with them in the sheriff's office, which was now being run by a deputy from a neighboring town, while an investigation into Sheriff Tucker's conduct was underway. The marshal was a stern-looking man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, but he treated Katherine with kindness and respect as he took her testimony about what she had witnessed. "Your testimony, combined with evidence we found in Hayes's possession, should be more than enough to convict him," the marshal said when she had finished. "I want to commend you on your courage, Miss Fowler. You survived an ordeal that would have broken most people, and you never gave up hope that justice would be served." "I had help," Katherine said, looking at Rafe, who stood beside her. "I would not have survived without Rafe. He saved my life and protected me when I had nowhere else to turn." Marshal Holbrook studied Rafe with interest. "You did good work here, Vance. If you are ever interested in law enforcement work, you should look me up. I could use a deputy with your skills and integrity." Rafe thanked him but politely declined. "I appreciate the offer, Marshal, but I have other plans. I'm getting married today, and then my wife and I are going to find a place to settle down and build a life together." The marshal's stern face broke into a smile. "Well, congratulations then. You are getting a fine woman, Vance. Take care of her." "I intend to," Rafe said firmly, and Katherine felt her heart swell with love. They found a preacher that afternoon, a kindly old minister who agreed to perform a simple ceremony in his small church. Katherine wished her father could have been there to walk her down the aisle, but she took comfort in knowing that he would have approved of Rafe. Her father had always said he wanted her to marry a good man, someone who would value her and treat her with respect. Rafe was all of that and more. Standing in the church with Rafe's hands clasping hers, Katherine listened to the minister speak the traditional words of the marriage ceremony and felt tears of joy slide down her cheeks. When Rafe slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one he had purchased that morning from the town jeweler, she thought her heart might burst from happiness. "I, Raphael Vance, take you, Katherine Fowler, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Rafe said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. In sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, I will stand by your side and be your partner in all things. This I swear before God and these witnesses." "I, Katherine Fowler, take you, Raphael Vance, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Katherine said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. You saved me when I thought there was no hope, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you found me. I love you with all my heart, and I promise to be a faithful and loving wife to you always." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California and the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride, young man." Rafe did not need to be told twice. He pulled Katherine into his arms and kissed her deeply, and she responded with all the love and joy in her heart. They were married. After everything they had been through, after all the fear and danger and uncertainty, they were finally, officially, husband and wife. A small crowd had gathered outside the church, word having spread quickly through the town about the wedding. People cheered and threw rice as Rafe and Katherine emerged into the sunshine, and several of the town's women pressed small gifts into Katherine's hands, tokens of welcome and congratulation. That night, they stayed in a proper hotel in Sonora, in a room with a real bed and clean sheets. It was the first time since the storm that Katherine had slept in a real bed, and the first time she had ever shared one with her husband. Rafe was gentle and patient with her, and their wedding night was everything Katherine had hoped it would be, filled with tenderness and passion and whispered words of love. In the days that followed, they began to plan their future in earnest. Rafe sold his mining claim to another prospector and settled his affairs in the area. Katherine sorted through her father's belongings, keeping a few precious mementos and selling the rest. Her father's mining claim had been moderately productive, and there was some money in the bank, enough to give them a solid start on their new life. They decided to head south, just as Rafe had imagined, to the San Joaquin Valley, where the winters were mild and the land was good for farming. Rafe had some experience with cattle and crops from his youth in Texas, and Katherine was eager to learn. They would start small, perhaps leasing land at first, and gradually build up their holdings as they could afford to. 3 weeks after their wedding, they packed their belongings onto a wagon Rafe had purchased and set out from Sonora. It was bittersweet for Katherine, leaving the town where she had grown up, where her father was buried. But she was ready for a new beginning, ready to leave the painful memories behind and focus on the future she and Rafe were building together. They settled eventually in a small town called Visalia, in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley. It was a growing community, filled with farmers and ranchers and families looking to make a fresh start. Rafe found work as a ranch hand on a large cattle operation, and Katherine took in sewing and laundry to contribute to their savings. They rented a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but clean and comfortable, and they began to build their life together. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Money was tight and the work was hard, but they were happy, happier than Katherine had ever imagined being. Rafe proved to be everything she had hoped for in a husband: kind, hardworking, devoted to her happiness. They spent their evenings sitting on their small porch, talking about their dreams and planning for the future. On Sundays, they attended church together and slowly became part of the community. In the spring of 1883, a little more than a year after their wedding, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Rafe the news one evening after supper, nervous about how he would react. They had talked about wanting children, but she worried that the timing might not be right, that they were not yet established enough to support a family. But Rafe's reaction banished all her fears. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully and placing a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Kate, you have just made me the happiest man alive." They prepared for the baby's arrival with excitement and trepidation. Rafe built a cradle in their small house, working on it by lamplight after long days at the ranch. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of love for the child she had not yet met. The women of Visalia embraced her, throwing a small party to welcome her to the community of mothers, and showering her with advice and hand-me-down baby items. Their son was born in October 1883, a healthy, squalling infant with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Samuel, after Rafe's mining partner who had been killed years before, and Rafe cried when he held his son for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered to Katherine as she lay exhausted but happy in their bed. "Thank you for this gift, for this perfect little boy. I promise I will be the best father I can be to him." "I know you will," Katherine said, watching her husband cradle their newborn son with such tenderness. "You are already the best man I know, Rafe. Our son is lucky to have you as his father." The years that followed were full and rich. Rafe continued to work hard, eventually becoming the foreman of the ranch where he was employed. The position came with better pay and a house on the ranch property, larger and more comfortable than their rental in town. Katherine poured her energy into making their house a home, tending a garden and cooking meals and raising their son with love and patience. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a tiny, delicate girl who looked exactly like her mother. And 3 years after that, another son arrived whom they named Jacob. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running through the rooms and tracking mud on Katherine's clean floors, and she could not have been happier. Rafe proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his children. He taught Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he was endlessly patient with Rose's questions and Jacob's adventurous spirit. On Sunday afternoons, he would take the whole family on picnics to a nearby creek, and Katherine would watch him play with the children and feel her heart swell with love and gratitude. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep, and she and Rafe sat together on their porch watching the stars, Katherine would think back to that terrible time when she had been running for her life through a blizzard. It seemed like another lifetime, something that had happened to a different person. But she knew it was real, knew that without that storm and that desperate flight, she would never have found Rafe, would never have built this beautiful life they shared. "What are you thinking about?" Rafe would ask, as he always did when he noticed her getting quiet and reflective. "Just about how lucky I am," Katherine would reply. "How lucky we both are. If you had not been out checking your trapline that day, if you had not heard my horse and come to investigate, I would have died in that storm. And we would never have had all of this. Then I am grateful for that storm," Rafe would say, pulling her close. "It brought me the greatest gift of my life. It brought me you." In 1889, 7 years after they had married, Rafe and Katherine finally had saved enough money to purchase their own land, 160 acres of good farmland just outside Visalia. They built a house there, a real house with multiple bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was the house Rafe had promised her all those years ago, and when they moved in with their 3 children and all their belongings, Katherine stood in the middle of the empty parlor and cried tears of joy. They worked the land together, planting crops and raising cattle and slowly building up their holdings. The children helped as they grew older, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of seeing something grow from the seeds you planted. Samuel proved to have his father's skill with horses and took charge of breaking and training the new animals they acquired. Rose had a gift for gardening and kept the vegetable patch that fed the family flourishing. Jacob, the youngest, was fascinated by everything mechanical and was always tinkering with equipment, trying to make it work better. In 1891, Katherine gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Grace. By then, Katherine was 31 and Rafe was 34, and they had begun to think their family was complete. But Grace's arrival proved that life still had surprises in store, and she was welcomed with as much love and joy as her older siblings. The years passed in a pleasant rhythm of seasons and growth. They had challenges, as all farmers did, years when the crops failed or the cattle prices dropped or unexpected expenses threatened to overwhelm them. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the good ones. In the summer of 1895, word reached them that Conrad Hayes had died in prison, killed in a fight with another inmate. Katherine felt nothing but relief at the news. The man who had murdered her father and nearly killed her had finally faced justice, and now he would never hurt anyone again. That evening, she visited her father's grave for the first time in years, bringing flowers and telling him about her life, about her husband and children and the home they had built. She felt his presence there, could almost hear him telling her how proud he was of the woman she had become. "I did it, Papa," she whispered, tracing the letters of his name carved into the headstone. "I survived and I found love and I built the life you always wanted for me. I hope you are proud." She stayed there until sunset, talking to her father and feeling the grief she had carried for so long finally begin to ease. When she returned home, Rafe was waiting on the porch, and he held her as she cried one last time for the father she had lost. But these tears were cleansing, letting go of the last remnants of pain and fear that she had been carrying. After that night, Katherine found that she could remember her father with joy rather than sorrow, celebrating the good years they had together rather than mourning his loss. The new century arrived, and with it came changes. The children grew up, one by one leaving home to pursue their own dreams. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and started his own horse breeding operation. Rose became a teacher in Visalia, educating the children of farmers and ranchers with patience and skill. Jacob went east to study engineering, sending long letters home describing the marvels of modern technology. Grace, the baby, was still at home in 1902, but she was already making plans to attend normal school and become a teacher like her older sister. Through it all, Rafe and Katherine remained devoted to each other. Their love, which had been born in crisis and forged in hardship, had only grown stronger with time. They still sat on their porch on summer evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over their land. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still laughed together and planned for the future. And when they lay in bed at night, Rafe still held Katherine close and whispered that finding her in that blizzard was the best thing that had ever happened to him. In the winter of 1907, 25 years after they had married, Rafe and Katherine celebrated their silver anniversary with a party that brought together their whole family. All 4 children came home, bringing spouses and grandchildren, filling the house with noise and love and laughter. As Katherine looked around the crowded parlor at the family she and Rafe had created, at the grandchildren playing on the floor, and the children they had raised now adults with families of their own, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and joy. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Rafe took Katherine's hand and led her out onto the porch. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead, reminding them both of another cold night a quarter century before. "You ever think about that storm?" Rafe asked softly. "About how we met?" "All the time," Katherine admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was going to die, and then you appeared like an angel sent to save me. Everything good in my life started that day, Rafe. My whole world changed because you were kind enough to investigate when you heard a horse in a storm." "My world changed too," Rafe said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Before I found you, I was just existing, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me purpose, Kate. You gave me love and family and a reason to wake up every morning grateful for another day. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Katherine felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, the tears of a woman who had been blessed beyond measure. "I love you too, Raphael Vance. You are the best man I have ever known, the best husband, the best father. You kept every promise you made to me that day in the cabin when you told me I was safe. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." They kissed there on the porch, just as they had so many times before, and Katherine marveled at how the passion between them had not faded despite the passage of years. Rafe still made her heart race, still made her feel cherished and desired and loved beyond measure. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost friends, buried parents, and watched the world change around them. But through it all, Rafe and Katherine remained constants in each other's lives, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1910, they became great-grandparents for the first time when Samuel's oldest daughter gave birth to a baby boy. Katherine held the tiny infant and marveled at the continuation of the family line, this new life that carried forward the legacy she and Rafe had created. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed, that the frightened young woman who had nearly frozen to death in a blizzard was now a great-grandmother with silver in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. But when she looked at Rafe, she saw the same man who had found her in the snow all those years ago. His hair might be completely gray now, his face more lined, his body not quite as strong as it once was. But his eyes were the same, those steady gray eyes that had looked at her with such kindness and promise. And when he smiled at her, she felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he kissed her. On a warm evening in May 1912, 30 years after they had married, Rafe and Katherine sat on their porch and watched the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. The farm was successful now, producing reliable income and supporting not just them but Samuel and his family, who had moved back to help run the operation. The house was full of life again, with grandchildren running through the rooms and Katherine once more cooking for a crowd. "We did well, did we not?" Rafe said, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "We built something that will last beyond us, something our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren can be proud of." "We did very well," Katherine agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We took two broken people who had lost everything and built a life full of love and family and joy. That is no small accomplishment, my love." "It was easy with you by my side," Rafe said. He kissed the top of her head gently. "Every day with you has been a gift, Kate. Even the hard days, the days when money was tight or crops failed, or we faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. We faced them together, and that made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead. Katherine thought about everything they had been through, all the obstacles they had overcome, and all the joys they had shared. She thought about the children they had raised, the legacy they were leaving behind, the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. "If I had to do it all over again," she said softly, "I would not change a single thing, even the terrible parts, the pain and the fear and the loss, because all of it led me to you, and you are worth every moment of suffering I endured." "I feel the same way," Rafe said. "I would gladly relive every hardship, every failure, every disappointment, if it meant I got to spend my life with you. You are my heart, Kate. You always have been, from the moment I found you in that storm." As they sat there together under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. She had survived when she thought she would die. She had found love when she thought she would be forever alone. She had built a family and a home and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. And she had done it all with the man she loved, the cowboy who had found her hiding in the snow from cruel men and promised her safety, a promise he had kept every single day of their life together. The story of their life was not quite finished yet, Katherine knew. There would be more years ahead, more grandchildren to love, more sunsets to watch from their porch. But the foundation was solid, built on love and trust, and the commitment they had made to each other on that cold January day when Rafe had pulled her from the snow and changed both their lives forever. "Thank you," Katherine whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was speaking to Rafe or to the universe or to God. "For what?" Rafe asked, tightening his arm around her. "For everything," Katherine said simply. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. Just thank you for all of it." Rafe turned and kissed her softly, a kiss that held 3 decades of love and devotion. "Thank you for letting me love you," he said against her lips. "Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for being my partner in all things. I am the luckiest man who ever lived, and I will spend the rest of my days being grateful for you." They stayed on the porch long into the night, holding each other close and watching the stars wheel overhead. 2 people who had found each other in the midst of a storm and built a love that would last forever. The cruel men who had hunted Katherine were long gone, defeated by justice and time. But the promise Rafe had made to her that day in the blizzard remained as strong as ever, a vow of safety and love and devotion that he renewed with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment they shared. And as the new day dawned over their land, bringing with it the promise of more years together, more love to share, more memories to create, Katherine knew that her story had the happiest ending she could have imagined. She had been lost and afraid, hiding in the snow from men who meant her harm. But a cowboy had found her, had promised her safety, and had kept that promise by giving her not just protection but love, family, and a lifetime of happiness. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible, and she would be grateful for it every day for the rest of her life.